I'm Jeff Fried with InterSystems, and I'm honored to have Dr. Sankalp Khanna join me in this. So we'll take you through first a bit about what the problem is, then an example from Sankalp and an example from me of projects, and then some principles. First, a quick show of hands. How many here think you know what AI-ready data is? How many are awake? Good. I hope you'll have a sense of that at the end of this 20 minutes, and some recipes, if not but you won't have a solution to what's generally a very hard problem. And you saw yesterday and today statistics about the really poor success rate of AI projects. I think Seoul was remarkably more dramatic than this. This is data from Gartner about less than half of projects make it into production. This is not atypical for early technology, as people are figuring it out, but it's really not where we want to be. And a Gartner survey of about 1,200 execs painted this picture, that 2/3 of organizations don't have AI-ready data or aren't sure, and a similar 2/3 don't have the right data management practices. Now, this is a survey from about a year ago. 1 year prior to that, the percentage that thought that they had AI-ready data, 4%. So there's progress from 4 to 35%, but still a long, long way away from people being able to understand where they are in this journey. The kind of data challenges reported, you can read. Lack of data, unstructured data where there's different management techniques for structured and unstructured data, and many people pay much closer attention to their structured data, and a remarkable amount of organizations saying they're really investing in AI-ready data. And I'm an old guy, I've been doing information data management for longer than I care to admit. I've never seen so much interest in governance, in practices and principles, and how you get to AI-ready data. So this is a time fueled by AI that you can convince your organizations to do many of the things that you have been wanting to do the right thing with your data. And hopefully I can help you. I have a very simple 3-step recipe, which might seem like motherhood. The first is to have a strategy. And the second is to know what data you have and pick the data you have that you're going to use based upon the use case. You don't need all your data, you don't need to clean all your data, but you need to control all the data you're going to use for AI. And the third that you'll hear from both of us is about a systematic approach to projects that includes measurement. Now, I mentioned I'm an old guy. This is a picture of me with slightly more hair from a decade ago, and you'll still find on YouTube various classes, and if you're not sick of me after this, you can go find sessions where I'm teaching information strategy, which I used to do quite frequently. And I have a cute little recipe called Aspire for how do you develop and maintain a information strategy in your organization. And I won't bore you with it, but I'm happy to talk to you about it later, but it just as a perspective about what has changed in the last decade, what's changed with AI and what's the same. How many have used synthetic data? If there's one thing that you take away, I would suggest that you go look at synthetic data, things like there's a thing called the Synthetic Data Vault. You can fill in gaps, you can correct for known biases, and you can broaden things like your test coverage using synthetic data. There's also some good products and assistance for profiling, and data profiling is an exploration of your data that will never be, I think, fully automated, because it's about getting your own sense of the correctness, the demographics of the data, the entropy of the entries, et cetera. And there's lots more elements. I mean, data products used to be the domain of publishers, and people like Wolters Kluwer or LexisNexis who sold data as their business. Now data products are things that many, many organizations are publishing. What's not changed is the need for strategy or the basic principles of having a published strategy that people can align around. What's not changed is the fact that all data is dirty. I mean, you can actually get to a quite clean position with some effort for certain kinds of data, but intrinsically, you should expect that whenever you're walking up to data in the wild, there's problems. And there's an organizational need for data literacy that has only just gone up with a need for AI literacy as well. One of the basic principles, and there's a book that I am not an author of, but it was an editor and reviewer and contributor called The Journey to Data Quality. This is now 15 years ago. I had a data quality practice at a company called Fast Search. The task of cleaning data is like cleaning out your basement. It's thankless, and it's actually a forever task. So going into a business project and saying, we need to redo our foundation before we can add a room onto the house is not a popular proposition. But in every project should work on this basic element of understanding the data you have, the quality of it, and improving it. And if you haven't done one, I really would suggest a content inventory. And that can be part of that is using a data catalog product or service, but a lot of it is an organizational survey of what data different groups in your organization have that they think is important, and it's also a mindset of willingness to share. I do have on our learning services site from InterSystems a class about this subject, about AI-ready data. What is it? What are the characteristics of it? How does it relate to architectural trends? And I think that's one of the biggest changes in this sort of time frame, not just the better discovery, profiling, classification tools, but this data fabric architecture that you've heard a lot about from InterSystems is a very good pattern because of having consistent governance over distributed data. It's a great way to keep track of the data you have, and that's the basic principle in having AI-ready data, is to know what data you have and control what you feed to AI. Where a lot of things still have not changed, having governance and good governance over your data is difficult largely an organizational and not a technical problem. And people know how to do it. So much of it is learning the techniques and applying them and keeping political will on it. And you certainly don't need to clean all your data to start. And in fact, depending upon the kind of AI you're using, it might be particularly different. So I'm going to talk about, we're going to show you 2 projects as examples and then come back to some principles. I'll turn it over to Sankalp.
Hi, so I work for the National Science Agency in Australia, and I would be what you call a benefactor. If you guys can fix your data, listen to Jeff, get your data AI ready, I'd be one of those guys who thank you, because my team kind of builds solutions around trying to help improve the operational efficiency of the health system and to sort of provide operational and clinical decision support. So, this one, right? Yeah. But before I sort of go into that, just a little picture of what the Australian health system looks like. We are a publicly funded health system. If you compare us to some of the others, and there's people from around the world here, this is a comparison with OECD countries before COVID. It's better to be on the right. And if you look at this carefully, you'll see that we're not doing so bad. The red dots are your OECD average, Australia's up here. So other than the fact that we probably drink and eat more than the rest of the world, our health system's not so bad. But when you went to university and you studied how to do these things, this is what they taught you your sort of life cycle looks like. You know, you get the data, you plan your model, you sort of then build the model, you communicate the model with the stakeholders, and then you eventually deploy it and you go to your next discovery thing, right? That's how simple it was. And so we started following this. We got the data and we sort of prepped it. And as we sort of looked at what we had prepped and started planning the model, we realized that there were some missing elements. And so we kind of had to jump back to discovery. And then filled in those missing elements, got those data bits, went back to planning and said, okay, now we've got the planning right, and let's start the modeling. And you see where I'm going with this, right? So at every stage of this, you kind of go, okay, there's new things you figure, there's gaps in the data, there's gaps in that domain knowledge that was shared, and so you keep going back, and you keep going back, and you keep going back. Your cost blows out, your time blows out, you're building a solution that's not the best. And the underlying barrier for all of this has been data. There's data quality issues, and these are sort of examples from some of the real data things from our projects. We don't know whether this person was born on the 2nd of December or the 12th of Feb. We don't know if this person was born in 1921 or 2021. No idea. Our best guess to tackle it. In a country like Australia, where we use a different metric system, weight of 12.6 in stone for an adult, and why would you ever record weight in stone? And you get answers to these questions when you start talking to the domain experts. Hey, somebody visiting told us this is what it was, or in the place of a medicine, you've got the address of a pharmacy because that's the only way they can publish something on there if they want to give it to an elderly person to tell them where to go. So you face all of these issues. There's structural interoperability, there's very poor semantic interoperability, even if they get the structure right. Different clinicians record things at different points and things like that. And as a result, we spend 80% of our time getting the data ready. The math is really the easy bit. And then, because everybody's doing it a bit differently, we build a model which is very specific to that department or that hospital. And so it's not built for sort of applying at other places. And then there's very poor transferability of what you're building. And all of that because of the challenges that data gives us. But that's not what we want to do. What we want to do is not build these bespoke models that are, okay, they're easier to deploy, but they're very hard to sort of reuse and rescale. We want to, this is the eventual goal we want to build. We want to build something that's more general, that's reusable, that's scalable. It's generally higher cost to start off, but then it's something that you can then deploy with ease, and it eventually benefits everybody. And if you're going there, there's 2 solutions. You need to have a standards-based approach, and you need to listen to Jeff and get your data AI ready. Right? That's the only way we'll get there. And if you can get us there, here's an example of what we are doing with the InterSystems team in Australia to sort of help improve hospital efficiency. So we are developing standards-based interoperable architecture that we are deploying with a Victorian health partner. And the first use case we've started with is to improve demand prediction. And compared to all of the other algorithms, as you can see with these ones, the gray is your predicted, your black is your predicted, and the gray is your actual. Most algorithms do really well, but the busiest days, the days when you've got the worst flow, that's the part they don't get. Whereas what we are building, we are actually able to get that really, really accurately. And we are doing it in a way that it's scalable. We are building it on Iris, and we're then going to take it to the next hospital and the next hospital in a way that everybody gets to use it. But yeah, you need to listen to him and get your data right for that.
Okay, so I know this feels like a whirlwind, but definitely talk to Sankalp about this project because it's a brilliant one and was an Impact Award winner this year. I'll give you another example, but let me ask you, who is doing an AI project at the moment? And if you've raised your hand, have you defined what the data, what makes your data ready for the project? Has anybody got a metric for that or a measure? That's one of the things that you should be developing along with the project, because it's easy to get life out of an AI system and really hard to get a sense of whether you're getting the right answers. There's a project that we've been doing through iterative loops at InterSystems called Yoki. It's named after a famous Japanese cognitive scientist, and it's taking our data from support, starting with our track care support, which is both particularly hard and multilingual, and also has a lot of the sort of most consumer-oriented things, and building a knowledge assistant for that. In the first phase, we knew that we needed the data to be just completely private. So there was a lot of work in finding out if there was any PII, and 1.7% of the data had some PII, and then making sure we cleaned everything up. And then we immediately found that more data was not better. We had really weird results from the knowledge assistant, largely when we had conflicting answers for the same thing within the data. So that was phase one. And in phase two, we did two things. We curated and tagged the data around basically 10 major categories and omitted things that were in the long tail. Just said we're going to care about the 80% of questions, tag data for that, deduplicate the data, and we made a validation test set that measured correct answers to a set of questions using, I'll say synthetic data, but really fuzzing out, like if you ask a question, there's 10 ways to ask that question that all should have the right answer, and we generated 9 of the 10 questions for the test set. So now, loop 2, we have an accuracy number and then a grade of effectiveness of, does this help the service engineer? And unfortunately, we were at loop 2, much better data, but most importantly, a measurement of what good was. And we knew we weren't good enough. And in loop 3, it was mostly about curating data and changing the structure of the data, and we got to 41% of the judgments substantially helped the support engineer. Not good enough. There was no change in the data from loop 3 to loop 4. Now we're changing the system, and we had set a goal of 70%, so we've achieved that goal. And I want to use this as an illustration that often you don't know until you get into it exactly what the nature of the data is, but that the principle that more data is not better for AI is really important, especially generative AI. And the principle of having a measurement of where you are and a idea of what's good enough as close to the project outset as possible. So how do you do this measurement and validation? How many people went to the AI workshop on Sunday? I bet you noticed that a lot of that was exactly about this. How do you do validation? Because last year we built something that said, here's how you hook the plumbing together and get life out of the AI system, and that's pretty easy. And we've made it even easier in Iris. Now it's how do you create a validation set? How do you know that the model is doing the right thing? How do you do auditing and troubleshooting? Different kinds of AI have different data needs. If you're doing machine learning, you want to encode the data and do classical feature engineering based upon that. If you're doing a generative thing that's a one-shot system, what you want is coverage. If you're doing a multi-shot system, what you want is depth. So there are some good materials that are about that. I'm not including a lot of the details in this. The principle is know what your use case is. Based upon the kind of AI you're using, you snap into different kinds of data preparation techniques, and then you know what data readiness looks like, and then keep measuring it. Gartner has a lot of material in this general vein, and the way that they break it out is essentially governance with 80% just good general data management governance and 20% extra for AI. Who feels like they have a good data governance program at their organization? And who would like to have one? Okay. When you can get there, it speeds things up. Governance is not just the police to slow you down and say no. It actually is a lubricant. The second thing is metadata management. Remember I mentioned in Yoki we tagged the type of data based upon the type of question, and that was a big accelerator. That's metadata. And we all have tons of metadata. If you just treat it as first-class data from a management perspective and work that goes a long way. How many people have a metadata management system in place? Okay, that's a good ingredient. And then the third part is the measurement, which a fancy term for it is data observability. And there are tools specifically for this. Once you've figured out what your metrics should be for this project, it's much easier than it was a decade ago to see where you are in data observability. The other element, this is also a Gartner slide, is about the team. Because when you're doing an AI project, please don't just include the data engineers. Including the data consumers from the start is really important because they're going to give you what's good enough. They're going to give you the test set. They're going to judge, and a motivated stakeholder is a gift in these programs. They will, it's amazing to me how motivated some of these folks are because these systems can do a lot for them. So use those stakeholders to establish what the quality goals are for the system and therefore for the data, and go back to them on a regular basis. Okay, so really simple principle. Have a strategy. If you're starting a project and you can't articulate your strategy to people, go spend a week formulating a strategy that's understandable at whatever level is appropriate. Do a data inventory if you haven't already. Know what data you have in your organization. Most projects start with a limited number of data sets, and then grow from there rather than trying to start with some notion of a complete data set. You're basically onboarding more data iteratively and then measure and keep measuring in production and forever. That's it for content. There's actually more in the slides when you look in CVent than we presented, and there's much more detail if you care to contact, I'd say, either of us. Questions? Oh, come on, Joe, you must have a question.
You answered all my questions.
Uh-oh.